Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good morning, still right? So does everyone have an executive summary of the statewide housing plan? If you do not, please raise your hand and we'll make sure you get one. The full documents are not for sale, but you do have one on each table. As Rosaria mentioned, we do have those available on the OHCS website. If you would like more copies of the executive summary, this is a tool for you to use as well as you talk to your community partners. So just let me know if you would like more copies of those and I'll make sure you get them. I'm happy to give you as many as we have here and then get some more to you to make them available back home. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kenny LaPointe. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Affairs at Oregon Housing. What does public affairs mean? So my division of the agency oversees all the legislative activity for OHCS, the external communications. We were sort of the driving force behind the development of the statewide housing plan, which we're going to talk about. We also oversee the agency's rules, so we make sure that Oregon administrative rules are in place for our programs. And then Sue over here, who's videotaping today, leads sort of our graphic design and website work. And then we also have the housing integrators, which is our sort of outreach division of the agency. They do a lot of cross-sector collaboration work. They were very instrumental in the development of things like Operation Welcome Home, the legislative agenda for the agency. So some of you know that we have like a permanent supportive housing initiative, which we'll talk about. And the integrators were instrumental in developing that strategy and in making sure the partnerships at the state level were in place. So we have OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, and DHS at the table committing resources to the initiative. So it's a cross-agency initiative. And then they've also been involved in things like our children's homelessness POP, which we'll talk a little bit about, and then the work we've done around workforce housing, which Kim Travis has sort of led from the integrator standpoint. So again, Kenny LaPointe, Assistant Director of Public Affairs. I actually started in this industry like 12 or 13 years ago at Neighbor Impact and was a housing counselor in the midst of that awesome time when the foreclosure crisis hit. And I recall getting several hundred calls a day from folks in Central Oregon that were facing foreclosure, which was really challenging. Following being a Neighbor Impact, I was with the Housing Authority in Central Oregon and ran the Housing Choice Voucher, Section 8 program, Family Self-Sufficiency program, Ready to Rent, IDAs, all that kind of stuff. So I very much appreciate the work that you all do on the ground, and I understand. I've been there, I've cried with people, I still cry when I hear stories about the folks that you are serving. I'm in sort of a fortunate circumstance in that I get to advocate on sort of your behalf, but an unfortunate circumstance where I don't have the direct connection to clients like you do, which is really critical. And for the folks that work at OHCS, they know how important it is to the agency to make sure that we are connected to the frontline work that happens. We want to make sure that our folks understand the impact of their programs on the ground. And that's really important for a culture build for OHCS. It's important for our staff to understand what you're experiencing when you meet with somebody on the ground. And we continue to reinforce that with our staff. We continue to make opportunities available for them to attend groundbreakings and grand openings and partner events. And I want to encourage you to reach out to us if you have those events coming, because we want to make sure our staff are engaged in that on the front line. It's pretty difficult sitting in a cubicle or an office in Salem and working with a partner and not really seeing the end result of the work that you're doing. And so that's what we really want to make sure is connecting. So we do have so many great staff at OHCS, and a lot of them do have frontline experience, which is wonderful. But it's important for me that we keep connecting to that. It's important for myself to be connected to the people that are being served. So many of you were involved in the statewide housing plan process. How many of you raised your hand if you were involved in one of the outreach events we held, which there was a lot of them? So, good. So we had over 40 outreach events across the state of Oregon in our initial phase of outreach for the statewide housing plan that was really gathering the stories from communities on what they're experiencing and what best practices OHCS should potentially be considering. We also combined this sort of analysis with data, which Megan Bolton sort of led the team who produced the data work. And we combined those things to come up with policy priorities, which we're going to go over in a second. We did 3 phases of outreach. In my opinion, we over-outreach in public comment in Oregon. 3 phases was a lot. Took 2 years to develop this plan. It's a living plan, I like to say. So we're constantly wanting to hear more feedback from communities on what's working and what things we should sort of be adjusting within the plan to make sure that the plan is effective. The plan is a big policy document, but it's driving the agency's work. You're going to see policies of the agency reflect the priorities in the plan. We just released an op-ed, which you guys just had a great conversation before this on sort of equity-related work. We just released an op-ed. Actually, Director Salazar released an op-ed yesterday on equity and racial justice, which is the first priority that we're going to talk about. I'll get into that a little bit in a second. But you're going to see the priorities reflected in our work. You're going to see them reflected in our policies. So it is going to impact you. So I want to make sure that you understand that it will impact the work that's happening on the ground. It is also extremely beneficial as we go to the legislature and advocate for more resources for Oregonians. We've got Governor Brown's ear. This plan, this statewide housing plan drove the governor's housing policy agenda. So it really helped her be able to focus on housing and recognize the need across the state. The outreach helped. And she's got a $400 million housing policy agenda that includes resources across the spectrum, which we'll talk about as well. So you guys know OHCS's mission: provide stable and affordable housing and engage leaders to develop integrated statewide policy that addresses poverty and provides opportunity for Oregonians. And our vision is that all Oregonians have the opportunity to pursue prosperity and live free from poverty. So you guys know kind of what OHCS does. We serve across the continuum, anywhere from homeless services all the way to home ownership and in between, everywhere in between. And we, for all intents and purposes, we are a funding agency. So we have money that flows through us that goes to you all in the community to make sure that people down at the bottom are provided with the services that they need to be successful and remain out of poverty. So we have a significant emphasis at the agency on cross-sector outcomes. The integrators have done a lot of this work. I know that in legislative advocacy world, that it's one thing for me or for you to show up at the legislature and talk about why you need more money for the programs that you're operating and the people that you're serving. But it's a whole different thing when you have the education sector or the health sector coming in and saying, if you don't provide the funding for these programs over here, we are never going to get to the educational outcomes or the healthcare outcomes that we need to get to. So we need to make sure that this part of the system is funded and working well if you want success in these other systems. The agency has a heavy emphasis on that. It is shown in the collaborative relationships across multiple state agencies, multiple local agencies, CCOs, workforce investment boards, early learning hubs, regional solutions teams. And I am willing to say that OHCS is leading that work from the state perspective. We are driving it. We are the ones engaging with the other state agencies and making sure that they see this bigger vision and are at the table with us. So I kind of talked a little bit about the statewide housing plan development. I talked about how it's going to be driving the agency's work moving into the future, how it's going to be driving the policies of the agency. We've just begun. The housing plan was launched on February 11th. The governor launched the plan, which is very important from our standpoint because she is leading the way for Oregon. That was a really important aspect of this. The governor is also sort of leading the communications work on a lot of the stuff that OHCS is doing. So it's not just coming from the agency, it's coming from the governor's office as well. And I definitely see the value in the work that you all are doing and that your partners are doing in communities. Talked about the outreach. In addition to the outreach sessions that you may have all participated in, many of you, I think, helped facilitate focus groups that we had with clients that were being served. It was very important for us to get the client perspective in the story, so we held these focus groups across the state. OHDC also helped facilitate focus groups with farm workers, so we conducted these across Oregon. There is a fall outreach report that's available on our website. I would encourage you to take a look at that so you can see the feedback that we heard from the communities and from clients across the state. So a big piece of the plan is we have 4 guiding principles for the plan. These are basically things that you see woven throughout all 6 of the policy priority areas. By the way, we will have time for questions at the end here, so you will get a chance there. What I want to emphasize here is equity. It is a policy priority in the plan. It is also a guiding principle. We cannot ignore the historical inequities that we see in policy and program design. And that is very important for us to have across all of our program and priority areas. So I'll talk more about how that's going to sort of impact some of the work we're doing. Working holistically with people at the center, I talked about the client focus groups. So making sure the client's voice is involved in program design is really important for us. And feedback is also provided back into us. So if something is working again, we can adjust. Not working, we can adjust. We also want to make sure we're strengthening partnerships. Partnerships are a core value for the agency. We cannot be successful if you are not successful. So we rely on you. OHCS, at the end of the day, if you did not exist in communities, we would just sit here with money with nothing to do with it. So. We also want to maximize and leverage the resources that the agency has. So we're having a lot of conversations about how we possibly generate income from some of our other programs and bring funding back into the agency to create a sustainable agency that can continue to put those funds back into the agency's mission. So we're going to go into each of these policy priorities. I'm not going to focus on each one in detail. I kind of want to hit on the ones that I think you all probably want to hear a little bit more about, so I'm going to focus on those. Please, if you have questions related to any of the ones that I didn't address, feel free to ask them. I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to make sure that you get an answer. So advancing equity and racial justice is a big emphasis in the plan. I mentioned a guiding principle. This is very difficult work for those of you who have taken it on. We know it's very difficult work. We know we can't ignore it. There are historical inequities. There is data that shows that housing access to people of color, to LGBTQ plus communities is lacking because of our historical policies. So we're really taking a look at our programs and how we can remove these policies that are creating barriers for access to OHCS programs. So that's going to be a big focus of the agency. This is the one priority area where we do not have an established goal, a numerical goal. So you'll see at the bottom we have an asterisk there that we are going to be setting a numerical target for our work on equity by December of 2019. I can't tell you what that's going to look like yet, but we will be setting a target around that. We know that the first thing that we need to do as an agency is take a look internally. And this is right now about us and making sure that our team is willing to lead, is able to lead, is well educated, and knows where we need to go with equity and racial justice. So we'll be taking a look at developing our own sort of equity statement as an agency, anything from hiring practice work to how our programs operate on the ground. And we have a bunch of implementation strategies that you'll see here. I'm not going to focus on these by any means. I wanted to make sure and highlight them. You have the placemat flyer on your table that actually shows you what the 2019 implementation strategies are, and they're also bolded in the PowerPoint. But I kind of talked about looking at the agency's practices around equity and racial justice, so you'll see that as one of the first things here. So homelessness. We're gonna we have a huge emphasis on homelessness, on building a coordinated, concerted effort to prevent and end homelessness with a focus on ending homelessness for Oregon's unsheltered children and veterans. So this is a huge policy priority for us. You'll see the goal here is to increase the percentage of people who are able to retain permanent housing for at least 6 months or more. Some of you know that this is something that is reported on currently, so that is why we're tracking it that way. So we're hoping to make sure that is at least 85%. This is also something we report to the legislature on every biennium, so we just did our agency budget presentation and we're required to report on this. So that is also important to know that the legislature is following this activity. This is obviously a core focus area of your work. So you're going to definitely want to pay attention to this. You're going to want to take a look at that placemat to see what the implementation strategies are for 2019. Implementation strategies will be changed every year. You could have some that are year over year seen in our implementation strategies, but we want to make sure we're driving at those things on a year-to-year basis because this is a 5-year plan. If you do have specific questions on any of these implementation strategies, you guys know Christy, you know Rosaria, you know the OHCS team, Jacqueline in housing stabilization that can really help you get some of these questions answered. They're the folks at the agency that are working specifically on this initiative, so I would encourage you to reach out to them if you would like more detail. There's also more to the plan than this. There is action initiatives under these as well, so I would encourage you to reach out to them and talk to them about this. I kind of want to talk a little bit about collaboration here because that's going to be a really important piece of this work, and we have the Operation Welcome Home initiative that is currently going on right now. Collaboration across systems and sectors, again, is going to be super important if we're going to be successful here. You guys can't do this on your own. We want to help in any way possible to make sure that the right folks are at the table. If we can encourage other community partners, if we can encourage elected officials to stand up with you as you try and tackle homelessness, let us know. Let us know what we can do. I'm actually going to be out in Central Oregon tomorrow and having this conversation with that region. I'm happy to come. Our team is happy to come and talk to your local folks about why these priorities are important. Again, OHCS is going to be backing our funding up behind these policy priorities. So these are not just at face value. There's more to them than just a policy priority. There is funding that's going to come behind them. I don't know if anybody's mentioned that OHCS is going to be releasing a GHAP NOFA for housing development this summer, and we are planning to have priorities in the GHAP NOFA, the Veterans GHAP NOFA, that incentivizes the communities that have really done well and established by name registries through Operation Welcome Home, so that there's going to be an incentive for those communities to apply for development dollars from OHCS, and we're going to continue to be doing that. You'll also see that in our permanent supportive housing priority. So if we can help at all, elected officials, housing authorities, Housing authorities are an important partner. You may not always get them at the table. Happy to help, see if we can help get them at the table. So we talked about Operation Welcome Home. Obviously, homeless children is a huge priority. Another thing I think I forgot to mention here is that these initiatives and goals are very aspirational and very big. And we are relying on the legislature to come in behind this and provide funding. So I'll talk a little bit more about the legislative agenda, but we do have over $400 million that is in the governor's agency budget request that will go towards these policy priorities. Permanent supportive housing, again, a huge focus, something we heard across the state. We need more permanent supportive housing to address chronic homelessness in Oregon. I worked on permanent supportive housing initiatives in Central Oregon. I know that having housing development dollars is not enough. You have to have services that are attached to housing units that are developed. You have to have the services for the clients to be successful. Rather than going to it at the end, I'll just let you know that our permanent supportive housing ask in the legislature is for $54.5 million. We're looking to build 500 permanent supportive housing units across the state. The Oregon Health Authority has committed 500 rental assistance vouchers that have services attached to them that will be project-based in all 500 of the units that are developed with the $50 million. So we have what I would call the three-legged stool, which is services, rent assistance, and development dollars. All have come together. That took a lot of work and a lot of you talking on the ground with your partners about the importance of that, and it's been heard all the way up to the governor's office. This is the governor's #1 priority in her budget request, and the thing that she's wanting to sort of move forward the soonest. We have a technical assistance offering that'll be coming out soon, and it's kind of called a Permanent Supportive Housing Institute, but what we're looking for in this offering is that a team of folks would come in and apply to OHCS to be a permanent supportive housing team. It would consist of, at a minimum, a developer, a property management company, and a service provider. It could also include your CCO. It could include multiple partners in that, but we're basically looking for teams to come in and apply to be a part of this technical assistance program. It's intensive technical assistance. For those of you who have operated supportive housing before, you know it's really important to have the service provider, management, developer all on the same page. You simply cannot just evict somebody in a crisis situation. You have to know how to address the situation. So the TA will really be intensive in how you make property management service coordination, how you develop supportive housing, funding that might be available, and then on the back end of that, we will be putting out hopefully $50 million, should we get it during session. We will be putting out funding, development funding, and the rental assistance funding and service funding that will be prioritizing teams that participated in the Technical Assistance Institute. Again, not going to go into the details on the implementation strategies, but if you're interested in this PSH initiative, please let our team know. You can talk to Christy, you can talk to Connor. They're good folks to connect with on that, so you can have more details on what is happening there. But be looking for something probably in the next month and a half to come out from the agency. So the next one, obviously the agency does a lot of work on housing development. I will spare you all the details on this particular priority, but basically we're looking to get 25,000 new homes through our housing development pipeline. OHCS has more homes in our development pipeline than ever before right now, approaching 8,500 homes in the development pipeline across the state. We just funded another 466 new homes on Friday through the LIFT program. We are asking for $130 million from the governor's budget request for the LIFT program. These programs are reaching communities of color. They're reaching rural communities. more than ever before, the idea behind LIFT is to really get to communities that haven't been able to access OHCS's other programs because of a variety of reasons, but there's a lot of federal policies in place with like the tax credit program that make it difficult to use tax credits in rural communities. Department collaborations, permanent supportive housing. The Permanent Supportive Housing Initiative is reliant on housing stabilization, housing finance to be involved. We're making sure we're connecting across our agency so that the pieces are fitting together, that we're partnering together, that we're not operating in a silo. So I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect, but I'm going to tell you we're doing it, and we won't stop. Homeownership, again, a core program of OHCS. We have the Oregon Bond Residential Loan Program, housing counseling centers, the Oregon Foreclosure Avoidance Program. So we're looking to assist 6,500 households in becoming first-time home buyers in the state over the next 5 years. We have increased our production on the Oregon Bond Program significantly. We did 1,130 first-time homebuyer loans in 2018. I think in 2016 we did like 330. So we went from 330 to 1130 over a 2-year period. So we've been really ramping up the use of that program. We're also wanting to make sure that our homeownership programs are addressing the homeownership gap for communities of color. There is some glaring data that shows us why we should focus here. As an example, 35% home ownership amongst African American households is at 35%, whereas it's at 65% for white households. We think we can do a lot of work to make sure that access to home ownership programs is made available more for communities of color, and so we'll be doing some intentional work around that. Rural, a huge priority. We went across the state, over 40 communities. Rural is very important to the agency. You already see that reflected in our LIFT program. We're really looking at how we can adjust the policies in our current programs so that they can better meet the needs of rural communities. This has been an area that's been long overdue for some good looks and good changes. So we're hoping to increase OHCS funded housing development in rural Oregon by 75%. We are still working out the details of what we mean by rural. So if you were going to ask me that question, I don't have an answer for that. We've gotten a lot of input as to what rural should mean. There is a definition for rural in the LIFT program, which you can take a look at. We're not like set on that by any means. We're definitely willing to tackle that, and that's going to be a big piece of the implementation strategy. We also have a workforce housing initiative that has done a lot of work in rural Oregon that the governor launched last year. We do have funding requests in for the workforce housing initiative in this legislative session, so we're looking to expand on the work that's happening there. We've been able to partner with employers in the coastal areas. In Donald, Oregon, we have an employer that's actually throwing some money into housing development. We're helping work with them by paying for SDC charges. So we're looking to do a lot more housing development in rural areas of the state. You'll see that emphasis here. You'll also see an emphasis on our sort of ag worker programs. And we have an agricultural worker housing facilitation team. I think I got that right. It's a big acronym, why not? So yeah, we're really working with our ag facilitation team to make sure we have programs in place that are effective to serve Oregon's agricultural workers. So here's a little bit of detail on the agency's legislative agenda. I want to say that, so we did some public outreach on our legislative agenda. We had to start the development of this year's legislative agenda about 2 years ago. So we had to really be on the front end of our legislative agenda. development. We did community outreach. We had some public forums at the agency where we were looking for help, and we're going to continue to do that. You can expect that over the coming years as we look forward to the 21 biennium start. We'll be looking to you all to help us develop that legislative agenda. Last full legislative session, we had one bill at the agency that was a technical fix to a program. So not exciting at all. This is exciting. So we are asking again for $130 million for the LIFT program. We're asking for $25 million to preserve existing affordable housing. So we know we can add 1,700 to 2,100 new homes to our pipeline, but if we're losing units at the same pace, then we're not making progress. I know that you all need housing units to put your folks into, and so we need to do more development. We need to increase the supply of affordable housing in Oregon. We're also, we have a request in for, an acquisition of attainable rental market housing. It's kind of an interesting way of saying it. Basically, it's a concept where we could potentially fund the acquisition of housing that is in your community that is already affordable, but it doesn't have anything that's restricting it to be affordable. So making sure it stays affordable for the long haul. So that is a concept that we came up with partners. The Greater Oregon Housing Accelerator is that sort of workforce housing initiative that I mentioned. So we're looking to expand on what we've already done there. The Modify the Housing Development Guarantee Program plays into that. So it's a loan guarantee that we can offer to folks. We're partnering with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. For those of you who've had land use conversations, you know that the land use system is a big part of housing development, and it's playing into what's happening in your communities. OHCS does not operate land use law, but we do have a partner at DLCD that does that, and we want to make sure that we are working with them on that. Rental market resources, so making sure that landlords and tenants have access to resources to be successful, so landlords know what rules they're under as landlords, making sure they understand that. And making sure tenants have access to programs like Ready to Rent and Rent Well, those types of things. And we're also talking about incorporating a housing caseworker who would help work with like voucher holders and advocate for them with the landlord, help them fill out applications, do all the kind of stuff that a lot of folks that you all work with may not have the capacity to do, or the understanding, or the history in doing, and so we want to make sure they have resources to do that. $20 million to tackle child and family homelessness. So this is another partnership-centric program with DHS and homeless liaisons. So addressing family homelessness through partnerships there and providing resources to do that. And then stabilizing funding for the EHA program. And what stabilizing means is making sure that that program is at continuing service level. It is funded for the long term, which we are pretty confident we're going to get to here. I talked about PSH, so I'm not going to go into this anymore, and I wanted to make sure you guys had a couple minutes to ask questions or throw stuff at me. Nobody thinks that's fun.
What is your, sorry, I'm lagging, your schedule to kind of release benchmarks and kind of report on how we're doing? Because I know all these things get us all excited when we rev up, but then we kind of don't know how it's moving forward.
Yeah, so our teams are right now trying to figure out how they're going to be setting that out. We're also working with our Housing Stability Council, our policy oversight body, to make sure that we're bringing reports back to them and giving them timely reports. We know we're not choking down 25,000 new homes in the development pipeline in this year. So we're pacing ourselves here. I understand that we need to pace ourselves here. So we're definitely doing that. And the divisions across the agency, Christy and the folks in housing stabilization are sort of working on how we're going to be coming back and reporting on that stuff. Anyone else?
You were saying that you're requesting money for 1,700 new homes. How many years do you expect that to happen?
So the funding, all the funding requests are over a biennium, so it's a 2-year funding cycle. So we would be looking at getting $130 million in funding for the development of 1,700 to 2,100 new homes over the 2-year biennium period, so 19 to 21. And then we would come back in and ask for more again.
No, if you get the money, how long will it take to build those homes?
So it really it depends. It's different in each circumstance, but with the LIFT program, we have a timeline of, I think, 36 months from when the funding goes out that the units have to be finished and hit the ground. So many of you know that like simply funding the development doesn't get a unit the next day. It takes 18 months, 2 years to actually complete the project. So it can vary based on project, and then it can also vary based on if you have a NIMBY issue that comes up.
As we all know, equity and inclusion work in rural communities looks very different from urban communities, and so I was wondering specifically with this initiative if there's a conversation around what that would look like in those two different worlds we live in.
Sure. So one thing I want to hit here.
Could you repeat the question so the folks in the back?
So Maggie mentioned that equity and racial justice work is probably going to look a lot different in rural communities than it will look in urban communities. So how's that going to look for us? So one of the things I want to mention here is that that a number of rural communities do have a very high percentage of communities of color in their areas. We're not, I've heard folks say, we don't have any communities of color, so how are we going to do this? I'm glad that's laughable. So, and I know that, like, I think in Central Oregon, you may be at like 94% Caucasian households and like 6% people of color. We're not saying that you don't have that in existence. We're saying, how are you reaching out to the 6%? How are you reaching the folks that are not as easy to reach or haven't historically been as easy to reach? So that is something we're going to be looking for across the entire state, whether it's urban or rural. And again, this is a partnership-related plan. So if something isn't working, we need to hear it. We're open to hearing it. We want to know how we should adjust, but we're not going to ignore it. And I would also encourage you to reach out to the folks in housing stabilization to ask them more about how that may particularly impact the homelessness priority or the permanent supportive housing priority.
A couple of things that have been on my mind, and I really do appreciate all of the work that's being done to break down silos and to emphasize equity. In the metro area, we've had a regional permanent supportive housing planning process that we're kind of wrapping up. And one of the really important things that has come out of it is recognition that the HUD definition of chronically homeless is inherently disparaging to communities of color. And so I would really encourage the state to kind of help move that needle a little bit. And so what we're hoping to do locally is to work with leaders from within communities of color to help us to make a new definition. And so maybe some of that, that obviously for the federal funds, we wouldn't be able to use that, but for state funds, we would, and for local funds, we would. And so I would encourage the state to kind of partner in that effort and help to move that needle, because we see it happen time and time again, and where we know that people like meet the philosophical definition of chronically homeless, but we cannot make it fit on paper, and it's so frustrating. And then the other thing that I know you've heard me say before, but is we need to also keep thinking outside of the silo of even just housing, because mental health and addictions, especially with the permanent supportive housing participants, is a huge issue, and we need a lot faster access to treatment.
Yeah, those are great comments, Erica. I think the statement about working with organizations that serve communities of color is a great way to address, that's a great way for us. I think that's a good model for us to use as a state agency on how we're going to address chronic homelessness for people of color, and how we're going to make sure that our policies are able to reflect service to people, rather than just a flat HUD definition or federal definition. So we do have flexibility with state programs, because they do not necessarily come with federal definitions, unless somebody wants to stick it into a bill, which we will discourage. Yeah.
I had a question. I saw a number of priority populations in the presentation for the statewide plan, and just curious about unaccompanied youth, where they fit in that. Also youth aging out of foster care and housing for them.
So I would encourage you to reach out to Housing Stabilization again on like the children's homelessness focus and how those populations might play into that. I do want to say that veterans and unsheltered families with children is a huge focus from the governor's office. So that is why we have emphasized that. It's also really good for communities to drive around a target population and have some success to show. Legislators want us to show success. So if we can really drive around initiatives, and we're not saying that this population deserves service over this population, we're saying we're taking a targeted approach to addressing homelessness for veterans. And we're going to take a targeted approach to addressing homelessness for families with children. So with PSH, our focus is more on homelessness, and we've kept that broad purposefully, because our friends at OHA in the past have wanted us to focus really on severe and persistent mental illness and substance use disorder, which has really left us in kind of a bind in how we're providing permanent supportive housing. So we've asked for the population to be expanded, and let you all decide what you want to do in your communities related to permanent supportive housing.
Okay, so we have time for one more question and then we're going to wrap it up.
Okay, I just wanted to take a minute to address that question about homeless and unaccompanied youth, because that was a topic that did come up in our budget note committee conversations, is feeling like there's such a pressing need in the state, and we've already prioritized multiple populations. How do we prioritize everything, especially successfully? And so I think one of the things that I would say is kind of tacking on to what Kenny already said, is that you're going to be developing, your own local priorities based off of the populations that are present and that you're able to bring in for services. But that was one of the reasons that we also went after additional funding for the families with children, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to use all of your EHA money or SHOP money on families with children and veterans, right? So with the ability to potentially sort of not use some of that existing funding for families with children, you're able to open up some funds to serve maybe possibly more homeless and unaccompanied youth.
We have one question.
I just want to clarify regarding the opportunity to develop permanent supportive housing in our communities. What I understood was there's going to be an opportunity to ask for technical assistance, and then from those people going through that process would have the opportunity then to develop the housing in our communities. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. So the technical assistance opportunity will be seeking teams. We are not in any way suggesting that a non-housing developer become a housing developer. We're suggesting that you all do what you do best, and you partner with the people that do the other things best too. And so we're hoping that you'll be able to partner with the developer, with whoever their property management company. Property management is really critical to successful permanent supportive housing. So, partnering with the right people in your community to serve the population that you're wanting to serve. So this TA opportunity will come out. You apply for that. If you get in, then you would be prioritized for the development and rental assistance dollars that will be coming out next.
Okay.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thanks for having me.